Hey everyone, John Peterson from J. Peterson Photography. Today I'm here to talk about space. No, not Captain Kirk in The Final Frontier. I'm here to talk about space in an image. So the use of space in an image can make or break a composition. And by that I mean that if you don't address the issue of space, space between elements, space around the element, space in the frame, your image may be okay or it may be great depending on how you use that space. Space can be positive or negative. Space can be between different elements. Space can be between the elements and the edge of the composition. And I'll show you examples of each one of these as we move through this video. You can use space or lack of space to help tell the story that you're trying to convey. Let's say you're out in a very desolate, windy, lonesome part of the world. You can actually use space to help impart that feeling in the viewer. It's really important to have enough space between elements in the image and really work to avoid overlap. You want your image to breathe. You want each of your elements to breathe. You want it to be relaxed. You want it to be stable. You want it to feel generally lacking of tension, because we're shooting really pretty landscape shots. You don't want to bring a lot of tension into the image unless it's a really tense scene, and rarely out in nature do I find a lot of tension. So let's talk about overlap real quick. So in overlap, really what I'm trying to say here is work to minimize the overlap between or touching of key elements in your composition. Don't have tree trunks crossing. Try to get some space between them. Having room to breathe in the composition is usually a positive. You want an element to be able to shine on its own without being intruded upon. So let's go ahead and take a look at some images. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some images now. Here's a shot from a few years ago up in the White Mountains of California in the ancient bristlecone pine forest. And this is a good starter image to talk about the use of space and to talk about separation. So first off, look at each of the branches and look at them in relation to the edge of the frame. I've left enough space here, I've left enough space here, here, and here. If I would have cut off any of these branches, let's say right in through here, that would have dramatically detracted from the image. So I've got enough space around my subject, lets my subject breathe, lets it shine, that's great. Taking a little bit of a closer look, there's some other elements of space that I wanted to point out in this image. Number one, look at this big knot right here and look at the rocks. I've got enough space right in here to have that sort of separation between the ground and the tree. That's a great thing. Up here, I've got this branch and I've got this branch. And notice that I have a slim line of separation between these two. Fantastic. That's exactly what I'm shooting for. That's exactly what I wanted in this image. My only nitpick in this image about space is between this branch and this branch. Notice how they overlap right here? This is a problem in my eye, and this, if I would have made this an absolutely outstanding image, I may have moved 1 to 2 steps to my right to try to bring separation between those two branches. The downside of moving sometimes is that you may create space between this branch and this branch, but it may close off space in another part of the image. So always move your feet, always pay attention to space and a separation between elements of the image. So this next image is from Horseshoe Bend down in Arizona a few years ago. Not a great image, but one that I thought might be a great conversation piece. Really the main subject for me in this image is the river, because the river does a pretty dramatic 180-degree turn, or actually greater than 180. And for me, space is a big part of this. You're out in the desert, you're out in the middle of nowhere, so there's a little bit of vastness involved with this. But what I really wanted to talk about is the space between the edge of the river here and the side of my frame, the edge of the river here at the side of my frame, the space, also the space between the rocks. So this rock wall here and this rock wall here and here are both good uses of space, and they're all almost equidistant. So you think about how much space between elements. Sometimes varying the space between elements can tell a different part of a story. If I would have cropped this a little bit closer and a little bit closer, the river would have filled more of the frame, and that would have told a little bit of a better story or a different story. So this next image was shot out in Wyoming in wintertime. This is in the Grand Teton National Park. And there was this lone tree that was growing out in the plain of grass. Because it was cold, because it was winter, because it was cloudy, it was a very sort of lonesome feeling to the shot. And what I really wanted to do was use space to help impart this feeling of cold, barren, lonesome to my viewers. And so I left a lot of space around the tree to help tell that story. Likewise, I left enough space between the tree and the edge of the frame to also let the tree shine and stand on its own. This next shot is from the Hoh Rainforest up in Washington, and anytime you're shooting in a forest, it's always a challenge because there's typically so many elements in a forest that it's very difficult to get a whole lot of space between the different elements. But this is a shot that I wanted to talk about. I don't like this shot, and it actually went in the garbage can, but I brought it out to talk about space and the use or lack thereof of space. So to me, the main subjects of this shot are really the trees. And I've got 4 major tree trunks here, 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top. This tree trunk, I've got enough space between here and here, which is great. Between this tree trunk and this tree trunk, I do have some space right here, which gives me some nice separation, lets each element stand on its own. Yes, they overlap up here, but because I have space, the viewer's eyes can make that separation right in here, and I think it works really well. I've got enough space between this tree trunk and this tree trunk right in here. That's wonderful. Between this tree and this tree, oops, I don't have any space. See how the tree overlaps? To me, that's very distracting and detracting from the image. And as a viewer, I cannot pick out this back part of a tree trunk. It doesn't stand out on its own very well. So not having space between here and here, I feel, detracts from the image. And of course, having this very large trunk coming in from the side of the frame is also a big no-no. But that's kind of why I brought this image out. I don't think it is a good use of space, and it's extremely messy. Some locations, this is a sunset shot down in Bend. In some locations, you just can't get space between the elements. So knowing that you can't get space, how do you frame the composition so that the viewer can pick out the distinguishing elements? For me, what I thought was most important in this shot was this spire, this rock, and this rock. That's what I loved about this shot. So I wanted to make sure that I had enough space between these 3 major elements. Granted, this rock overlaps with this rock, this overlaps here, but notice I have space between here, I have space between here, I have space between here. Of course, I have space around this foreground rock. I have a little bit of space and separation right in here, which is awesome. So in a very messy environment, I made the best use of what I could and created as much space as I could between the various elements. This next shot, Mount Hood, Trillium Lake, very common shot. You see it a lot. But here's another example of using space. So these 2 rocks and the mountain are really the focal point of this image. Having enough space between here and the edge of the frame, here and the edge of the frame, enough space between here, enough space between here, and enough space between here creates a very calm, stable, tranquil types of feeling. Everything is very foundational, it's very well rooted, and it's not busy, there's no tension in the image. Very simple image, but through the proper use of space, I think it came off really well. Here's a shot from a test garden down near Salem, Oregon, and another example of just space in an image. So of course, this flower stalk is the main subject of the image, but I've got two other important elements. I've got this back here and this bunch of flowers back here. Notice I have enough space here to let this flower stalk breathe, and likewise I have enough space here between the elements to let this really stand out and shine. It helps that the background elements are out of focus, but to help even make this pop further, it's giving it enough space and room to breathe so it does shine. So this next shot was from the Hoh rainforest as well, and this was kind of a test for me of how I could bring enough space to an image and try to have each tree trunk stand on its own. You can see there's a whole lot of stuff going on in this image. But take a look at the space and take a look at the tree trunks. I've got space here all the way up to the top of the frame. I've got space here, 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 here. Here's a little bit of an overlap, but I've got a little bit of space here between this tree trunk. I've got space here, here, here. Here's a little bit of an overlap. I got space here, 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 here. Even though they do join at the bottom, because I have space up here, it lets these two tree trunks stand alone. I've got enough space right in here in between the big tree and this last tree trunk. I spent maybe 5 minutes moving back and forth trying to find the right position for this comp so that I had the maximum amount of space or the least amount of overlap throughout this entire image. At a very detailed level, here's another example of space to talk about. Of course, it's the water drops and the ferns that are the main subject of this image. And yes, I've got good space between them. I've got good space between this and the side of the frame, this and the side of the frame. But look up a little bit further. I've got space between here. I've got space between here and here. So the parts of the image that are in focus, or relatively in focus, I have enough space between all the different elements. If this fern would have been overlapping all the way down here, wouldn't have worked as well. Granted, I do have overlap up here, but because it's out of focus, it doesn't matter as much. Then lastly, of course, 3 tree trunks, middle of winter in Wyoming. Have enough space between all of these tree trunks, of course, so it works. But the thing I like about this from a space perspective is almost all of the big bodies of space here, 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 and here are equidistant. I almost have the same amount of space between the edge of the frame and the first tree trunk, here and here, here and here. And I moved around to try to get equal amounts of space between all of these things to create a really balanced, open, kind of uniformed image when I shot this. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on space in an image. I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for more videos.